Welcome to Order Militarist Radio TV, and today's first episode in American history and Catholic history in America is about the early life of John Henry Holliday, or better known as Doc Holliday. And we will be bringing you several episodes on his life to tell about it. And at the end of his life, he finally did come into the church and died a faithful Catholic. And Brother Alexis will be the host.
Thank you for having me on, AJ. This is going to be a fascinating series about one of the most famous men of the Wild West. And we're going to cover a few that became Catholic. It's quite amazing. Most of us don't know that, who are Catholics in the United States. To show the power of the church when it was run correctly to convert some of the most famous people of America.
Yeah.
They saw the truth of it. And not at all like the generation of traitors, liars, and scum that have infected so many of the institutions of our church in our own day. And all you young vocations out there, these you need to imitate the priests of old. Okay, so let's get right to it. Doc Holliday. Let's start with his family, because if you know the origin of family, you know something about him. So when did the Holliday family come to America? How did they benefit from the new land from the Native Americans?
And everything is from this giant, awesome, well done autobiography of Doc Holliday with the help of his relatives and this writer Gary L. Roberts. So, and this book is linked on the show page because it's just amazing.
If you do homeschooling, get a copy of this book and assign it reading to your children. They'll learn a lot of U.S. history from a very interesting and intriguing angle. So, when did the Holliday family come to America, and how did they benefit from this new land?
His story is infused with what might be called the Southern mystique, as thoroughly and profoundly as it is with the legend of the last frontier, and so the man behind the myth is both magnified and obscured by a double distortion. Ironically, from the beginning, John Henry Holliday was much a child of the frontier as he was of the Old South. Indeed, he lived most of his youth on what was even then known as the Southern frontier. Georgia was the youngest of the original 13 colonies, and although the young country of which it was part had pushed westward all the way to the Pacific Ocean by the time he was born, John Henry's childhood was spent in the red clay country of Georgia, only a few years distant from the time that the region was the domain of the Creek Nation. In the course of the Civil War persuaded his father that he should move his family beyond the reach of General William Tecumseh Sherman's armies. Young John Henry was transplanted into the piney woods and wiregrass of southwest Georgia, a thinly populated region of subsistence farmers and free grazers until the railroad gave it life and opened up the economic opportunities in much of the same way that the railroad generated the boom towns of the last West. Restless settlers were pushing west along the rivers into the interior, mindless of the claims of the natives and certain of their own right to be there. There was a Celtic edge on the invasion. Willful sincere sorts The Scots, the Irish, and the Scots-Irish generated a cracker culture marked by fighting, drinking, gambling, fishing, hunting, idleness, and independence. They faced Georgia's frontier with the same leisurely attitudes of their Scottish and Irish forebears, an open-range tra- tradition they brought with them, moved them into the interior before their agricultural potential was fully realized, and created a value system at odds with the stern Yankee Puritanism and nascent capitalism that held the way of the North. The Holliday family was a beneficiary of the tragic story. John Henry's father, Henry Burroughs Holliday, was a self-made man, Andrew Jackson's common man, the kind of man 19th century Americans celebrated. His people were plain folk in the Old South. Henry's paternal great-grandfather, William Holliday, was one of the three Scots-Irish brothers who immigrated to America from Ireland sometime after the 1750s. He settled in the Lawrence district of South Carolina, while his brothers, objecting to settle in slave states, moved north. As Henry later recalled, William and his sons fought in the American Revolution with the hero of Hornets Nest, Elijah Clark, and took their first lands in Wilkes County, Georgia, from the bounties of that service. Later, William Jr., Henry's grandfather, returned to Lawrence County, South Carolina. There his son, Robert Alexander Holliday, met and later married Rebecca Burroughs, whose father had fought with Elijah Clark in the American Revolution. Henry Holliday was born to them on March 11, 1819, the first of 11 children. After his father's death, Robert relocated to Anderson County, South Carolina, and in 1831 he followed opportunity into Georgia with his family and 8 slaves. He opened a tavern on the road between Newnan and Decatur near Fayetteville. He eventually bought an 800-acre farm in Fayette County, which was part of the Old Creek Nation. Over the years, he enlarged his holdings and became a respected and well-known citizen.
So we're tapping into the whole history of the South and its growth. And his family lived in a certain part of Georgia when Native American lands were taken. And how did this happen? And what was this whole controversy about?
Yeah. Like most white Georgians, emboldened by President Jackson's support of the state's position, the Holidays saw the Cherokee removal as in, in,
Inevitable.
and right. The bulk of the General Scott's force consisted of volunteers from Georgia, Tennessee, and North Carolina. On May 12, 1838, young Henry, still shy of the 20, enlisted in Fayetteville as the second lieutenant in Captain John D. Stell's company of the 1st Georgian Volunteers to help effect the final removal of the Cherokees from Georgia. On May 26, 1838, Scott began operations. He urged the troops to act with humanity and mercy, but a contemporary observer reported that in most cases the humane injunctions of the commanding general were disregarded. It was a disagreeable duty at best, taking men from their fields and women from the hearths and children from play to push them at gunpoint to relocation centers. But many of the undisciplined and ill-trained militiamen seemed to enjoy the duty too much, taunting their captives and not allowing them time to even gather clothes or other items from their homes for the journey. A motley rabble followed behind the troops, burning homes and crops, or moving into the cabins to eat the food still cooking over the fires, and to plunder the farms before the former owners were out of sight. Z. A. Zile, a Georgia militia officer who later served as a colonel in the Confederate Army, would recall. I fought through the Civil War and have seen men shot to pieces and slaughtered by the thousands. But the Cherokee removal was the cruelest work I ever knew. The Cherokees were held in makeshift stockades where sanitary conditions were awful. Sickness and despair set in quickly. By June 18th, General Charles Floyd of the Georgia militia reported to Governor George M. Troup that the only Cherokees left in Georgia were prisoners. General Scott now dismissed all the troops save his regular army units, and the youthful Holliday, not yet 20 years old, was discharged with his company at New Echota on June 20th, having done his part to the start the Cherokees west on their trail of tears. He received 160 acres of land in Pike County for his scant service and turned his thoughts to his own future.
So most people don't know this, but in the 19th century, many Indians, though they were living in the territories of the 13 colonies, uh, uh, they weren't U.S. citizens, but they were U.S. You think you call them U.S. nationals.
Mm-hmm.
They had their property rights and their human rights and their constitutional rights completely violated. Talk about search and seizure. This is a violation of the Constitution. And hundreds of thousands of acres were just robbed from their possession, something that had been in their families and in their tribe's possession for centuries. And they never got any compensation for it. They were herded on basically like concentration camps. And then they were made to walk basically to their death and a starvation walk, just like the Japanese did with many Allied forces in the Second World War.
Mm-hmm.
And this was called the Trail of Tears. And let's say something about it, AJ.
Yeah. Let's see here. All the many many senators, even U.S. congressmen, opposed it, including the great Davy Crockett of Tennessee. President Andrew Jackson was able to gain congressional passage of the Indian Removal Act of 1830, which authorized the government to extinguish Indian title to lands in the Southeast. In 1831, the Choctaw became the first nation to be removed. The removal served as the model for all future relocations. After 2 wars, many Seminoles were removed in 1832. The Creek removal followed in 1834, the Chickasaw in 1837, and lastly the Cherokee in 1838. And they all went into the Ohio Valley into what is called Oklahoma. And
How did they get to Oklahoma?
yeah. Let's see. I believe they walked. They were forced.
Under, under gunpoint.
Yeah. It was a death march, literally.
And most people don't know that Oklahoma this time was not a state. It was called Indian. It was called Indian Territory, and it was supposed to be land reserved for them forever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So.
What did the Supreme Court do in all of this? Shouldn't they be defending their rights of these Indians?
Yeah. Let's see, where is that case at? Let's see here. Yeah, right here. The statutory argument for Indian sovereignty persisted until the Supreme Court of the United States ruled in Cherokee Nation versus Georgia in 1831 that the Cherokee were not a sovereign and independent nation and therefore not entitled to a hearing before the court. However, in Worcester versus Georgia the next year, the court reestablished limited internal sovereignty under the sole jurisdiction of the federal government, in a ruling that both opposed the subsequent forced relocation and set the basis for modern U.S. case law.
So the actually Supreme Court forbid the relocation.
Yeah, but
Andrew Jackson just paid no attention to the Supreme Court ruling, right?
Yep.
So other than his father participating in the original detention of the Cherokee, did any other members of his family participate in the Trail of Tears?
Just as God.
Just his dad. This is one of the great crimes of the 19th century. Now, a lot of American history will teach you in public schools that America was great, never did anything wrong. But if you look south of the border, okay, into the Catholic countries from Mexico all the way down to Argentina, you will find that 60 to 80% of the population is of native origin, and they're still alive. They are never wiped out. They converted to the Catholic faith, most of them, and they still live on their lands. And this shows you the difference between the Catholic religion, which is the true Christian faith, and Protestant religions, which are not true versions of Christianity. In the Catholic countries, I'm not saying there weren't crimes committed against natives, but at least genocide wasn't one of them. And in the United States, the native peoples have almost all dwindled away. I don't even think there's just a few million alive today on little reservations. And the Indians who were moved to Oklahoma had that state taken from them. Matter of fact, I think there was recently a court case that said the Indians in Oklahoma were robbed of half the state and that needs to be given back to them.
Yeah.
It was just recently in the news. So one of the sad moments in American history for which the Indians never got satisfaction. They were robbed by the Masonic courts and by the Masonic government. And let's now talk about slavery in the South. It was an institution that profoundly characterizes the history of the 19th century, the reason for the Civil War in a sense, not entirely. And you mentioned the family owned some slaves. What was the family's involvement in slavery in the South?
Yeah. As the linchpin of Southern society, slavery involved much more than morality or even economics. In the South, indeed, the country at large, the issue was not so much the effect of slavery on blacks, but its effects on whites. What was at stake was the very balance of a white society, that the shattering of all the social conundrums of Southern life and the anticipated reordering of the Southern way of life from top to bottom along the lines of the hated Yankee model. As Southerners rationalized the evils of slavery, they did so by making the contest one of honor, principle, and will. To the forefront rushed all the personal pride, individualism, and community solidarity that transcended the class and welded together a fervent belief that the coming conflict was above all self-defense. Henry's stance on the issue can only be assumed based on his rising position in the community. Though he was not a planter, he did own slaves, and the perceived threat to Southern institutions jeopardized his upward mobility. Moreover, he shared popular views about Southern rights and Yankee meddling. Every individual is anxious to so improve his lot and that of his family. Henry doubtless measured his future in terms of Southern unity. There was honor at stake, a way of life, and the images of Henry that had passed down the corridors of family remembrance, a reminiscence of contemporary portraits of the Mississippi Sergeant Princess. Instant in resentment, bitter in his animosities, yet magnanimous to forgive when reparation had been made. There was no littleness about him. Even toward an avowed enemy, he was open and manly, and bore himself with sort of antique courtesy and knightly hostility, in which self-respect mingled with respect for his foe, except when contempt was mixed with hatred, and then no words can convey any sense of the intensity of his scorn.
Now, most people don't know that Doc Holliday was born with a birth defect. So let's talk about that and how did he overcome it?
Yeah. The infant compromise of 1850 was in trouble too. By August 14, 1851, when a second child, a son, was born to Henry and Alice Jane. The boy was likely delivered by John, who came down from Fayetteville for the occasion. They named him John Henry Holliday, after his uncle and father. He became the center of their world. The Holliday family was both large and close, so John Henry's birth was a major event in the life of the whole family. As the eldest son of the eldest son, John, young John Henry was destined to play a large role in family life. As he was the primary heir, the guardianship of the family's good name would one day fall to his charge. The Hollidays celebrated and made plans for the future in light of this new birth. One family source, and curiously only one, recalled that John Henry was born with a cleft palate. Now, Mary Cowperwaith Fulton Holliday, the wife of John Henry's cousin Robert Alexander Holliday, and a person who never met John Henry herself, reportedly wrote that the most distressed John Styles Holliday consulted with his colleague and cousin by marriage, the renowned Dr. Crawford W. Long, who assisted him in his delicate surgery closing John Henry's cleft palate, using ether as an anesthesia. If true, this was an extraordinary event that should have made news throughout the country. Not only for long, he was involved in a public controversy about the use of ether at the time, but also for Holliday, who would have won accolades for the successful delicate surgery. Now it goes on to talk about the surgery at the time. A
Yeah,
success,
so yeah,
yeah,
it
go
was a
ahead.
very delicate surgery then. It was almost like experimental. So, however, there was such a stigma for having a child with a cleft palate that in many cases no one ever admitted it. So,
Yeah. A successful cleft palate surgery on a small child was certainly newsworthy and under anesthesia, extraordinary and groundbreaking. Several innovations were introduced between 1844, when Sir William Ferguson first outlined operative procedures for cleft palate surgery, founded on anatomical and physiological data. In 1877, when Francis Mason published his work on hair, lip, and cleft palate, but notably the first successful cleft palate surgery under anesthesia was not reported until a physician named Buzzard announced his use of chloroform in 1868. If Holliday and Long did perform such an operation on John Henry, it was a major event, and in light of the previous battles to gain recognition for his work, Long's failure to publish reports of it was inexplicable. Cleft palate surgeries were performed as early as possible because of the complications of feeding infants caused by the condition and because of a possible speech impediments occasioned by waiting until after the child began to speak before operating. The later consideration argued for surgery for the second birthday, but surgery within the first several months was discouraged because of the shock to the infant's system. The belief that the small child did not bear the loss of blood well, and the simple fact that early efforts often failed to close the cleft satisfactorily. Given the complexity of the surgery, the specialized knowledge and tools required, and the complications of using anesthesia on an infant at the point in time, such a procedure would have been virtually impossible outside of a hospital without receiving public notice. If a surgery was performed on John Henry, it would have certainly happened in 1851 or early 1852 at the latest, because Long moved to Athens, Georgia in 1852. If John Henry was born with a cleft palate, it was never obvious in photographs of him, even as a baby, the earliest of which was almost certainly taken before any surgery could have occurred. Of course, posterior cleft would not have affected the lip or the upper jaw, would not have created the facial deformity. According to Mary Holliday, the cleft extended to but not through his lip.
Okay. So it was internal to the mouth.
Yeah.
Mhm. So he was quite fortunate if that happened that to have such expertise.
Mhm.
But it's not inexplicable that a doctor wouldn't talk about it because it was considered shameful and also highly risky surgery.
Mhm.
And a doctor might not want to mention that he attempted such a thing on such a small child. Now, we must mention that the Holliday family was not Catholic, and yet some relatives were Catholic. So tell us more about that.
Yeah. In 1857, John Henry's uncle, Robert Kennedy Holliday, moved to Jonesboro with his family so that most of the Hollidays and McKays were now within the triangle of Griffin, Fayetteville, and Jonesboro, close enough for support and frequent visits. Robert's wife, Mary Ann Fitzgerald, was a devout Roman Catholic. His daughters, Martha Ann, called Mattie by the family, Lucy, Rebecca, Mary Teresa, and Roberta Rosalie, added yet another dimension to John Henry's experience. Mary Ann's Holliday's uncle, Philip Fitzgerald, and his wife, Eleanor, were also part of the family circle. Then in 1859, Henry agreed to assume the guardianship of a young orphan named Elijah Pritchard, who moved in with the family.
And who was it that gave Doc Holliday his first look at Catholicism?
That would have been, let's see, his aunt, Mary Ann Fitzgerald.
And what'd she do? She gave him a book about it, or what?
I think through the frequent visits they made,
Mm-hmm.
and when the guys went off to the war in the Civil War, all the women came to the house to be with everyone, and he was the only guy at home.
So yeah, so Doc Holliday, when the war breaks out, Doc Holliday is too young to go, and he ends up to be what, that like the head of the household, the only man on the estate,
Mm-hmm.
and he has in charge everyone else. Even though, how old was he when the war broke out? He was what, 12, 11?
Yeah.
11. So he was quite a mature young man, product of homeschooling. Okay. Now, one of these relatives goes on and becomes a nun, doesn't she?
Mm-hmm.
Which one? Do you can you?
Yeah.
And she spends her whole life praying for him and working
Writing,
for the conversion of the family.
yeah, and writing letters.
Hmm. Yeah, that's how they did it back then. They didn't have phone, they wrote letters, but their letters were powerful.
Okay, let's see here. Let's see. Hmm. Doc Holliday's cousin, Sister Mary Melanie, was a Catholic nun. Her correspondence with Doc Holliday was the basis for the obituary. So, yeah, his cousin became a nun.
Hmm. Very devout Catholic family. Now, tell us something. The 1850s, the decade before the Civil War, um, and how did this influence his view on life that he would later take?
Yeah. The election of 1856 had come and gone. The Democrat James Buchanan gave Georgia little reason for optimism. They found hope in the Dred Scott decision, but were soon disillusioned by open defiance of its precepts. They were more disturbed by the growing strength of the new Republican Party in the congressional election of 1858. They saw the fugitive slave law declared unconstitutional in Ableman versus Booth, and recoiled at the news of John Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry, Virginia, in October 1859. Senator Robert Toombs, known as Georgia's Son of Thunder, and considered a moderate in Congress by most observers, became convinced that further compromise was impossible. The Georgia legislature passed resolutions condemning John Brown's aggressions, and Joseph E. Brown, Georgia's fiery governor, set up factories for the production of weapons and gunpowder and ordered the Georgia militia to make preparation for the inevitable conflict to come. There were still Georgia voices like that of Alexander H. Stephens, who urged caution and restraint, but the martial spirit was gaining momentum in Georgia as it was in other southern states. The crazy quilt election of 1860 found Georgia in turmoil. The Democratic Party had divided into northern and southern factions, meeting in Baltimore, Maryland, Richmond, Virginia, respectively. And a splinter group calling itself the Constitutional Union Party added more confusion. The nomination of Abraham Lincoln by Republicans did not factor into Georgia's election, but still the vote was so close among the other three candidates that the legislature had to decide where Georgia's electoral votes would go. Lincoln was elected president without Georgia's votes, so the exercise was perfunctory at best, so much so that Governor Brown urged the legislature not to bother. Then on December 20th, 1860, South Carolina formally repealed its ratification of the U.S. Constitution and seceded from the Union. And Griffin, Fayetteville, Jonesboro, the Hollidays, Mackays, Johnsons, and Fitzgeralds were caught up in the anger against the North and debate over what Georgia should do. In the end, despite the eloquence of men like Stevens, Benjamin H. Hill, Herschel V. Johnson, who urged moderation and caution, a referendum was held and the people voted 50,000 to 37,000 to follow South Carolina's example and defend Georgia's honor in the only manner left to it. On January 19, 1861, Georgia declared itself an independent state. It was not immediately apparent what course Georgia would take, but in February, Georgians played prominent roles in the convention that convened in Montgomery, Alabama, to draft a constitution for the Confederate States of America. On March 16th, Georgia formally adopted the new constitution, became a state in the new Confederacy. John Henry Holliday's world was about to change forever.
Yeah, the conflict of the North and South is something been going on for more than a generation, and the states were all divided on the issue whether to allow slavery or not. If you remember, in the U.S. Constitution allowed slavery, so the South's position was this is part of this is implicit in the Constitution, but increasingly the Supreme Court, named by presidents who were from the North, was altering the meaning of the Constitution and breaking down the agreement that the colonies had forged in the Revolution on that issue. So today we look back at it as a question of progress in the sense of the abolition of slavery. In fact, as a Catholic position, slavery was abolished by the popes. Racial slavery was condemned and abolished by the popes in the 16th century. So the United States was like 400 years behind the clock on that. And but the North increasingly made it an issue so that they could extend their power over the South. Okay, so it wasn't just a matter of pure things, because the one thing about the end of slavery in the United States, and this is rarely said, as an anthropologist, I'll make this comment, it's not enough to free a slave. You have to give him back what he was robbed of, okay, which was of his humanity, his culture, his education. The slaves of the South were treated subhumanly. So when a father had children, he wasn't married to the woman. And after having children by her, he was shipped somewhere else as a breeding animal. So children got to know who their father was, and it was an absolutely horribly inhumane institution. And it was perpetrated mostly by Protestants, although there were Catholic slave owners in the South. In Louisiana, where, however, they were treated with much more humanity. But in violation of papal law, because racial slavery is illegal, was condemned under the pain of excommunication. You had to free the slaves. The children of slaves were born free. So a terrible institution, and that was the cause of the Civil War, but most of us hear something about it in public school education. And this is the age in which Doc Holliday would grow up, an age in which people are interested in justice, in human rights. There were big conflicts over it, and people willing to go to war over it. But the South, we have to remember, didn't go to war to protect slavery. It went to war to protect states' rights. Okay, but so the legal question is, the United States was a federal system where the colonies had joined together ratifying the Constitution. So legally speaking, if a state had the right to enter the Union by ratifying the Constitution, then it had the right to leave. And that was the position of all the southern states. It's the position of many constitutional scholars even to our day. But Lincoln decided that no, he was going to impose union on the South, and that once you joined, you could never get out, which is not a rational position, but it's entirely Masonic position, because the US was created and maintained by the Masonic order to serve its purposes. And if it fell apart, it wouldn't do that. So it was an absolute necessity to subdue the South and conquer it back by all means. And we spoke in part about this in our program on Lee, and we'll hear more on the conducting of the Civil War and how it went about. Georgia played a very important role because it was one of the few places they had arms making and ammunition manufacture in the South. The South was totally unprepared for this war. They didn't have the industry, they didn't have the manufacturing, they didn't have the supplies. They barely had a railway system. And so economically speaking, their defeat was inevitable. But Doc Holliday, I'm amazed at 11 years old, he was the only man on the plantation and he ran the place. That shows you a lot of character. And he had to grow up real quick, because in the 6 years of that war, he had to run that household. And so this is probably what made him such a strong character when it came to crime control, okay? Because he becomes famous for that. called Doc Holliday, however, because he goes to study dentistry. And this probably has something to do with the fact because he had a cleft palate. He realized it's important to have good dentists, good
Mm-hmm.
dentistry. And that was like the new profession to get into. It had just become a professional thing. Dentistry is they just started granting doctorates in it. And it was a lot easier to study than actual medicine or surgery. And a lot of people needed dentists in the 19th century. Almost no one had. It was like no dental care, no daily brushing, no fluorides. So a lot of people suffered from teeth problems, and it was a good career to get into. So that would perhaps explain his choice. So our next episode, we're going to cover his years at college and
Oh,
dentistry,
his
and then
years during the Civil War and which
okay,
goes into the college and
okay,
everything.
okay. So, and in our second program on Lee, we're going to be discussing his years in the Civil War as a general, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, what's on? What will be featuring tomorrow?
I guess we could make our comments about the commentary by Tucker Carlson on West Point.
Oh yes, yeah. Tucker Carlson did a wonderful expose on problems at West Point, and um, military formation is something of interest in Ordo Militaris Catholicus, and uh, the contrast U.S. military formation with Catholic military formation is something that's needed to be done, and we have had many recruits out there who want to know more about it, and this is going to be a show tomorrow that they should tune in on and learn something about it. Because a military order is much more than a national military.
Mm-hmm.
It's inspired by Catholic religious principles. It is a fraternity in a sense, and it has a constant purpose. It doesn't serve anything other than Jesus Christ. It has a very high ethical purpose and um, a very clear vision about what it is and what it does that doesn't change throughout the ages. And it's a wonderful ideal that our ancestors gave us, and in Ordo Militaris Catholicus, we are dedicated to reviving it and to living it. And this is what distinguishes us against from all other organizations out there that just talk about saving culture but don't do squat. Okay. So Ordo Militaris Catholicus is an association dedicated to restoring the kingship of Christ uh, through restoring the Catholic military ethos and spirit.
I've noticed our viewers have gone down on YouTube, so please share the videos, like them. I want to thank all those who are watching them on BitChute and giving them the likes now. Thank you. That was impressive that we got our first 3 video on YouTube about Joseph McCarthy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so please share our videos. No, we understand not everyone has time for videos, but the best thing you can do is stop watching the propaganda on television and totally change your viewing habits and watch good Catholic videos that you find on the internet and make that what you watch in the evening.
Mm-hmm.
You'll turn your social media experience, your TV experience into a great formative moment and opportunity. And that's why one reason why Ordo Militaris Radio TV, we're trying to do lots of biographies, histories, to help you understand the world from a Catholic point of view. Many of the things you're not going to hear anywhere else on any channel and from any author.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not a few very important people that are watching our programs. We've had our programs, the topics we've talked about on our programs raised by Ann Barnhart, Taylor Marshall, hours or days later. They're watching our channel and it's making an impact, but they're not quoting us
Yep.
because that's part of social media territoriality, I suppose to say. They can't admit that we're actually doing something good. They don't want you to know it's coming
Mm-hmm.
from us. So see, if you want to see it first and hear it first, Ordo Militaris Radio TV.
Yeah.
Not get it in its regurgitated, dumbed down form.
Yeah. And and if you like what we do, please support us by becoming either a one-time donor or a monthly subscriber by going to ordl-militaris.net. Clicking any of the show pages except one. All of them have all of those have the make a free will monthly subscription, and there you click it, choose if you want one time or monthly, and follow your steps. Uh, Thank you to the two who have made the monthly pledges, and the one-time donations have fallen off since we've hit the third rail too many times.
I encourage you to support. It's an apostolate we're running. Neither AJ get an income. It goes for equipment so we can produce a better quality program and get other anchors on the show. We'd like to have it's an open invitation for others who'd like to do programming on Ordo Militaris Radio TV if we find it consistent with our stated goals and policy for Ordo Militaris Radio TV. And this can help grow it. So most social media people who are out there are just raking the money in and living in mansions. Okay, they're not poor people, and the money's going to them. So when they ask you for a donation, that's really not what they mean. They mean help me make me wealthy. Okay, and I don't deny that people deserve a salary, but call it a salary. You know, ours is apostolate. It's actually going. It's not going to us. We're not getting wealthy from it. And so encourage you to support an apostolate like this because we need to get back to the apostolate. Okay, the church isn't supposed to be run by laymen, but it's certainly not. The gospel is certainly not supposed to be preached for the sake of personal profit. That's not Christian at all. Okay, so I encourage you to support Ordo Militaris Radio TV and come by our websites, ordo-militaris.net or ordo-militaris.us. At our .us one, you can get some, you can invest with our PMC out of Montana, or you can buy some of our merchandise to help support our work, or you can pledge, become a member of the order as a donor, a lay member, a herald, a squire, a knight, baronet, or baron, and way of supporting us. So you could buy stock so that we can begin our operations, offering security and service, security and defense services. And this is a way actually not just listening, but become a participant in the order and sanctifying your life and helping others thereby. And we're warmly encouraged. We don't refuse anyone who wants to join the order.
Yep. This is Ordo Militaris Radio TV signing off. Deus Volt.
Deus Volt.